100 words per minute for 10 minutes. 10 seconds more. 5 seconds. Start. Sir, this is one of the most significant tax reforms in India in recent history, which has been debated within the political and economic system of India for the last almost over 15 years. The government had, in the last decade itself, appointed a task force headed by Dr. Kelkar, which had in 2003 first mooted this idea of a uniform goods and services tax in India based on the VAT principle. This was considered by the government and it was first put into public domain through the Parliament in the year 2006 when it was referred to in the budget speech of the then Finance Minister Mr. Chidambaram. A tentative date that it could be implemented and rolled out by 2010 was also indicated at that stage. Discussion paper on it was released in November 2009. There was a joint group of officers between the centre and the states which was formed in order to do a lot of technical coordination, and a formal constitutional amendment was introduced along with the budget in the year 2011 itself. There were two parallel tracks on which discussion on this went on. The first was that the government had created an empowered committee of state finance ministers which considered the draft, which also interacted with the union government and had been suggesting several changes as far as the goods and services tax proposals were concerned. Simultaneously, this was also referred to the Standing Committee of the Ministry of Finance, which in August 2013 submitted a report which was again sent to the Empowered Committee in November 2013, and some suggestions made by the Empowered Committee were duly incorporated by the government at that time. In December 2014, after the change of government, the Cabinet approved the amendments. This was preceded by a series of discussions between the government and the members of the Empowered Committee. Some states felt that the power to impose tax within the state or subjects in the state list were within their domain, and therefore this was their exclusive jurisdiction. Some manufacturing states felt that since this was intended to be based on the destination principle and the consuming states would benefit more, hence there would be a loss suffered by the manufacturing states themselves. They wanted an adequate mechanism for their own compensation. Most of the states were brought on board, and the December 2014 amendments were on the basis of that consensus which had been reached at that stage. That bill that was approved by the Empowered Committee was also approved by the Lok Sabha in 2015. When it came before this Honorable House, it was then referred to a select committee. The select committee made certain suggestions, some of which have been incorporated. Thereafter, the government considered it absolutely necessary to build a larger consensus. The need for a larger consensus proposal was to change the taxation structure as far as the country was concerned. Today, within the domain of the union government and the states, there are different categories of taxes which are imposed. These were all intended to be subsumed into the goods and services tax. Now, for some of those who felt that this was surrendering their sovereignty, the merits of the system itself are that it would convert India into one uniform economic market with a uniform tax rate, bring about a seamless transfer of goods and services across the country, enable us to check evasion and therefore enlarge the revenue. This should also be equitable in as much as the consuming states could also be benefited as far as the economy is concerned. It was therefore extremely important that before a bill of this kind is considered, there is a political consensus built up to the extent that it is possible. Therefore, once the select committee and earlier the standing committee made their recommendations, the empowered committee of state finance ministers was consulted from time to time to suggest various changes and improvements in the bill. Simultaneously, a process of dialogue with all major political parties in Parliament was also undertaken. Therefore, the two discussions, both in the empowered committee and dialogue with the political parties, had to be balanced with each other, and the best possible outcome had to be incorporated as far as the bill was concerned. Almost every major political party in the country is a part of the power structure in some part of the country or the other, or at least it is likely to be. Therefore, since this impacts across the center and the states, a larger political consensus was necessary. I am extremely grateful to all the political parties whose members are present here that we have been able to achieve as far a consensus as it is possible, if not unanimity, as far as the language and the spirit of this legislation is concerned. Sir, the whole concept of the GST Council is Indian federalism at play in the best possible mode. 2/3 of the voting power in the GST Council would belong to the states, and 1/3 of the voting power in the GST Council would belong to the center. The votes required to settle a particular issue are 3/4, and therefore necessarily the GST Council has to work particularly under a consensus, and therefore the center and the states will have to work together. Therefore, this would be federalism at play, under which the GST Council itself would then be able to take its decisions. Sir, the whole object is that after this Constitution amendment is approved and ratified by the states, the Council would come into existence. Subsequently, 3 enabling laws, 2 by the Central Parliament and 1 by state legislatures, will have to be passed. The two central laws would be in relation to the central GST and the interstate GST. The state legislation would be with regard to the state GST. Hopefully, once the Council approves those legislations would be brought before this Honorable House. Parallelly, the IT backbone which is required to support the GST network is also being prepared.